I am Marcus, 32 years old. After a decade of being treated like the ultimate family disappointment, my own brother tried to buy my supposedly foreclosed home at auction for pennies on the dollar, and my dad funded his scam. While I was sitting in my own living room, drinking coffee and looking at the ocean, my brother Julian texted our family group chat. He wrote, "The bank finally took the beach house. I am buying it for $400K. Margaritas on the deck soon." And my dad, without even calling to ask if I was okay or if I was about to be homeless, wired him $200,000 in exactly 90 seconds. But there was one major thing they did not know. That property was never in foreclosure. I had just paid off the $1.2 million mortgage in cash. And the vice president of my bank was already on the phone with me, ready to absolutely destroy Julian's life. Before I tell you exactly how I let them ruin their own lives, hit that like button if you believe karma always collects its debts. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from down in the comments. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare really started. The morning it all unraveled was a completely ordinary Thursday. The kind of crisp, brilliant California morning that makes you feel incredibly grateful just to be breathing. I was sitting at my heavy oak desk in my home office. The floor-to-ceiling windows were wide open, letting in the sharp, clean smell of salt air and the rhythmic, calming sound of crashing waves against the shoreline. I was in the middle of reviewing highly complex satellite data for a major coastal restoration project when my cell phone, resting on the corner of the desk, suddenly lit up. It was a notification from the family group chat. I almost ignored it. In fact, I usually ignored it. The family group chat was nothing more than a digital echo chamber for my parents to brag about my older brother, Julian, and for Julian to constantly validate his own inflated ego. But then Julian's name popped up on the screen, followed immediately by 3 celebration emojis. Something about those emojis, the sheer smugness radiating from the screen, made me pick up the phone. My blood immediately went ice cold. Julian had typed a message that I had to read 3 times just to make sure my eyes were not deceiving me. He wrote, "Finally buying Marcus's beach house at the foreclosure auction. Bank listed it for $400,000. Worth at least $2.8 million. Getting it appraised next week. We can flip it or keep it as a family vacation property." I just sat there. The sheer audacity, the unbelievable cruelty of the text paralyzed me for a full minute. The beach house, my sanctuary, the place I had purchased back in 2019 and poured every ounce of my soul, my sweat, and my hard-earned money into. The house that had never, not even for a single passing day, been in foreclosure. Before my brain could even fully process the utter absurdity of Julian's claim, another message popped up. It was from Dad. The timestamp on the screen showed he replied within exactly 90 seconds of Julian's announcement. 90 seconds. Wired you $200,000. Your mother and I are in. About time that place got put to good use. Then Mom chimed in, typing with what I could only imagine was a vicious little smile on her face. She agreed enthusiastically, talking about how the property was wasted on me anyway. My younger cousin Chloe added a confused emoji, but nobody addressed her. Julian followed up quickly, stating he already had the down payment ready and the county auction was happening right now, today, this very Thursday. I did not type a single word back. I did not yell. I did not throw my phone against the wall, even though every fiber of my being wanted to shatter the glass. Instead, I took a deep, stabilizing breath and calmly opened my secure banking application. I navigated through the menus, clicked on my primary mortgage account, and stared at the screen. Current balance, $0. I had made the final, massive wire transfer exactly 3 weeks ago. It was a $1.2 million early payoff. The house was mine, free and clear, completely unencumbered by any debt. There was no bank waiting to seize it. There was no county auction. There was only my brother, spinning a web of absolute lies. Suddenly, a private direct message from Julian slid across my screen, separate from the group chat. "Don't worry about the house, little bro. I know you're struggling. This way it stays in the family. You can even visit sometimes if you ask nicely." Struggling. There it was. that toxic, poisonous word they loved to use. They had weaponized that word against me for a decade to make themselves feel superior. I closed my eyes and gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned completely white. Right at that exact second, my phone started ringing. It was an unknown number, displaying a local area code. I let it go to voicemail, my mind still racing. It rang again immediately. Same exact number. Then a third time. You do not call someone 3 times in a row unless the building is on fire. I finally swiped the green button on the screen and answered. Mr. Marcus Vance speaking. A deep, highly professional voice said on the other end. This is Richard Sterling, Senior Vice President at Coastal Federal Bank. I apologize for the urgent and highly irregular call, but we have a situation. Go ahead, Richard, I said, forcing my voice to remain perfectly steady, betraying none of the chaos brewing inside me. A man named Julian Vance just contacted our foreclosure and real estate liquidation department. He is standing at the county courthouse right now with a cashier's check for $400,000, claiming he is legally purchasing your property at 847 Ocean Vista Drive at public auction. Hearing the words spoken aloud by a senior bank executive made the madness completely, terrifyingly real. My property is not in foreclosure, I told him, looking out through the glass doors at my pristine deck. Correct, Richard replied, his tone laced with absolute certainty. You paid off the full mortgage balance 3 weeks ago, a $1.2 million early settlement. It was one of our smoothest transactions this year. We have the release deed right here. But Julian has provided physical documentation showing he is your brother, and he is aggressively trying to push the sale through the county clerk's office. He is my brother, I said, letting the heavy, suffocating weight of the ultimate betrayal settle deeply into my bones. But he does not represent me in any capacity. He does not have my power of attorney. He does not have my permission. And I absolutely did not authorize any sale of my home. There was a heavy, loaded silence on the line. I could hear keyboards clacking rapidly in the background on Richard's end. Mr. Vance, I need to ask you directly, Richard said, his tone turning incredibly serious, stripping away all corporate pleasantries. Is your brother attempting to fraudulently purchase your property using falsified documents? That was the moment. That was the exact, defining second my entire life split violently into 2 distinct chapters. The before, where I tolerated their endless disrespect, their subtle jabs, and their financial superiority complex for the sake of keeping the family peace. And the after, where I finally decided to stop being the punching bag and let them burn in the massive, destructive fire they had just started themselves. Yes, Richard, I said smoothly, a dark sense of purpose filling my chest. That is exactly what he is attempting. I am conferencing in our senior legal department and the county fraud division right now, Richard stated firmly. Please stay on the line. I put the phone on speaker, set it down on the desk, and walked over to my kitchen. I poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. I looked out at the vast, endless ocean. They wanted a war over real estate. They thought I was an easy target, a pathetic financial failure who needed to be rescued and then tossed aside like garbage. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The hurricane was coming for them, and they had absolutely no idea. To truly understand why Julian thought he could just brazenly steal a multi-million-dollar house out from under me, you have to understand the incredibly sick, twisted dynamic of the Vance family. Julian was the undisputed golden child. He was the firstborn, louder, more charismatic, and he worked as a financial advisor, or at least that is what he aggressively marketed himself as. He wore tailored suits that he could barely afford, talked endlessly about stock portfolios, corporate mergers, and promotion tracks, and lived a life completely funded by credit card debt. I, on the other hand, was the family outcast, the black sheep, the disappointment. I chose a career in marine conservation technology. When I first told my parents I was starting an ecotech firm focused on ocean preservation, my dad actually scoffed out loud. He asked me when I was going to abandon this save the whales nonsense and get a real job with a real salary, like my brother. For a solid decade, they narrated my life to their friends and our extended family as a tragic comedy. They firmly believed my business was a joke, a prolonged midlife crisis that somehow happened in my early 20s. What they completely failed to realize, because they never once bothered to ask about the details of my work, was that my company secured massive, multi-million-dollar government and private contracts. They didn't know my marine conservation consulting work brought in an incredible high six-figure income annually. I kept my mouth shut. I learned early on that sharing my victories with them was dangerous, because every time I tried to share a financial milestone, they turned it into a weapon to strike me down. I will never forget Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. The memory is burned into my brain like a scar. I had just closed a monumental deal with an international environmental agency and decided to finally treat myself. I bought an $85,000, state-of-the-art research boat to expand my company's capabilities and field operations. I made the catastrophic mistake of showing a picture of the vessel at the dinner table while my mother was passing the cranberry sauce. Dad looked at the photo on my phone, completely unimpressed, his face twisting into a scowl. "Wasteful spending, Marcus. You are just showing off to compensate for your absolute lack of an actual retirement plan. You should be funding your 401k or setting up a college fund for your future kids, not buying expensive toys you can't afford." Not even 10 minutes later, Julian arrived. He was intentionally late, making a grand entrance as always. He casually tossed a set of heavy, expensive keys onto the dining table right next to the turkey. He had just financed a brand new Porsche. It was a terrible, disastrous financial decision wrapped in sleek German engineering. But Dad practically gave him a standing ovation right there in the dining room. He clapped Julian on the shoulder, calling him a financial genius who understood how to project massive success to attract wealthy, high-net-worth clients. Mom spent the entire rest of the evening fawning over Julian's Porsche, while my research boat was repeatedly referred to as Marcus's impractical little hobby. That Thanksgiving was the exact night I went home, locked the door of my beautiful beach house, and created the ghost ledger. I opened my laptop and created a highly encrypted, private spreadsheet. I called it the ghost ledger because it meticulously tracked the silent, invisible ways my family stole my dignity and eroded my self-worth. Every time they diminished my accomplishments, every time they forgot my birthday while throwing massive, expensive catering parties for Julian, every time they rolled their eyes when I spoke, I logged it. Entry number 12. Published a major, peer-reviewed research paper. Dad called it a massive waste of time because it didn't come with a giant bonus check. Entry number 34. Secured a massive corporate consulting contract. Mom told me to read the fine print and hire a lawyer because naive people like me get scammed easily by big corporations. Entry number 52. Paid off my $1.2 million mortgage in full at 32 years old. I didn't even bother telling them this one. I knew for a fact they would just claim I got lucky, or accuse me of being irresponsible with my savings, or somehow credit Julian's financial advice for my success. The ghost ledger taught me a harsh, undeniable truth. You cannot buy respect, love, or validation from people who are deeply, fundamentally invested in your failure. They needed me to be poor. They desperately needed me to be struggling so their utterly average, heavily debt-ridden lives looked like massive success stories in comparison. But the landscape had shifted violently over the last few months. Julian had grown increasingly desperate. His arrogant, flawless facade was visibly cracking. I heard rumors through the family grapevine that his lavish, unsustainable lifestyle was finally catching up to him. He was missing HOA payments on his luxury condo. His credit cards were maxed out. He was facing a potential lawsuit from a disgruntled client. He needed a massive win, a huge, immediate influx of cash, or his entire fake empire was going to collapse completely. And then, somehow, he set his greedy sights on my house, my highly coveted $2.8 million beachfront property. I knew Julian was arrogant and greedy, but creating fake foreclosure documents that required a level of brazen criminal intent and sophisticated forgery I genuinely did not think he possessed. More importantly, it required highly intimate details about my property. He needed my exact parcel numbers, the specific legal name of my mortgage lender, and the precise legal description of the lot boundaries. I am extremely private about my finances. I shred every single document. I used encrypted hard drives. There was absolutely no way Julian just stumbled upon my private mortgage details by casually searching public county records. Someone on the inside gave him the keys to the castle. As I sat there in my office, the phone on speaker waiting for the bank's legal team to join the call, my mind raced through every possibility. Who had physical access to my private office? Who knew my complex filing system? Who knew exactly how much my house was worth and who held the original deed? And then the realization hit me like a physical, devastating punch to the gut. Sarah, my ex-fiancée, we broke up 8 months ago. The breakup was incredibly messy, drawn out, and painful. She sat right on my living room couch and told me she was tired of waiting for me to grow up and get a real corporate job with a predictable salary. She wanted the country club lifestyle, the designer bags, the constant validation of high society, and she felt my relentless dedication to marine conservation was utterly embarrassing. We ended the engagement, called off the wedding caterers, and she moved out. But before she finally left, she had 1 full week alone in the house while I was out on a deep-sea research expedition. Sarah and Julian always got along unusually well. They shared that same shallow, insatiable obsession with status and wealth. I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter, feeling sick to my stomach. Sarah had taken photos of my financial documents. She had to have. And when Julian got desperate enough, she sold me out. She handed him the exact blueprint to my financial life, probably demanding a hefty cut of the profits once he flipped the house for millions. My own flesh and blood brother, and the woman I almost married, actively plotting to steal my home, destroy my credit, and leave me sleeping on the street. The bank's legal team finally clicked onto the conference call, pulling me out of my dark thoughts. Mr. Vance, this is Elena Rostova. I am a lead investigator with the county's financial crimes unit, working directly alongside Coastal Federal Bank. We have officially halted the auction. Good, I said, my voice dropping an octave, cold and detached. Where exactly is Julian right now? He is standing directly at the teller window in the main courthouse lobby, arguing aggressively with the clerk, Elena said. He presented a physical cashier's check for $400,000. We have immediately frozen that check. But Mr. Vance, we need your full, unconditional cooperation to proceed with felony charges. This isn't a family misunderstanding. This is a highly coordinated, premeditated real estate fraud. You have my full cooperation, detective, I said, staring out at the unforgiving ocean. I want to bury him. I want to bury every single person involved in this. The stark reality of the situation began to settle heavily into the room as Detective Elena Rostova laid out the initial forensic findings over the speakerphone. Julian had not just walked into the county courthouse on a desperate whim. This was a calculated, premeditated attack on my livelihood. We are currently examining the physical documents he submitted to the county clerk, Elena said, her voice crisp, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. He has a forged notice of default, complete with a fake embossed stamp that looks remarkably identical to the official county seal. He clearly used a standard template downloaded from a legal form's website, but the account numbers, the original loan dates, and the precise legal property description are entirely accurate. Someone actively fed him inside, confidential information. It was Sarah, I said instantly, the pieces fitting together flawlessly in my mind. My ex-fiancée. She lived here in this house. She had full access to my primary safe when I was out of the country 8 months ago. I could hear Elena typing rapidly on her keyboard. I am adding her name to the primary suspect list immediately. We will pull her financial records and bank statements. If she received a cash payout or a written promise of payment from Julian, we will find the digital footprint. People who commit these types of crimes always leave a trail. While Elena spoke, my phone vibrated violently against the desk. Another message in the family group chat. I kept the call on speaker and tapped the screen to open the app. It was Julian, completely oblivious to the trap closing around him. Clerk is taking forever. Typical government incompetence. But the house is basically mine. Dad, Thanks for the wire transfer. Once I flip this place and sell it to a developer, I'll pay you back your $200K with 20% interest. Easiest money we will ever make. I stared at the glowing text. Easiest money we will ever make. My stomach churned with a mixture of disgust and profound sorrow. My father had literally liquidated his retirement savings. He had raided his 401K, probably taken a massive penalty for early withdrawal, and possibly even taken a second mortgage on his own home, just to help his golden boy steal my property. Dad didn't do a single shred of due diligence. He didn't ask to see a real estate listing. He didn't call a broker. He didn't verify the foreclosure status with the county. He just heard Julian say I had failed, and he blindly threw a fortune at him to capitalize on my supposed ruin. Detective, I said, interrupting Elena's typing. My father wired him half of that money, $200,000. He sent it within 90 seconds of Julian announcing the scam in our family chat. Elena paused, the typing stopping abruptly. Did your father know the foreclosure was entirely fabricated? I don't know for sure, I admitted softly, rubbing my temples. But he definitely knew he was profiting directly off my downfall. He didn't care if I was losing everything. He didn't call to ask if I needed a place to sleep. He only cared about getting a piece of the pie before it was gone. Technically, Elena said, her tone shifting to strict, uncompromising law enforcement mode, by providing material financial support for the fraud, your father is an accessory to the crime. If we can prove in court that he knew, or should have reasonably known, that the transaction was fraudulent, he could absolutely face felony charges as well. Let them all face charges. That was my prevailing, overwhelming thought. Let the entire house of cards burn to the ground. I was done protecting them from the consequences of their own toxic actions. Proceed with the asset freeze, I told the bank VP, Richard, who was still listening quietly on the line. Do not let Julian leave that courthouse lobby with a single dime. And Richard, yes, Marcus, I want you to be the one who tells him. I want him to hear it from the vice president of the bank. I want him to know that I am the one holding the leash. It would be my absolute pleasure, Richard said, a hint of steel in his voice. I hung up the phone and walked over to my heavy steel filing cabinet in the corner of the office. I entered the passcode, opened the drawer, and pulled out my thick, pristine folder of original property documents. The original deed, the extensive title insurance policy, the final, glorious payoff letter from Coastal Federal Bank with the brilliant, beautiful zero balance printed boldly at the bottom. I laid them out meticulously on my desk. My fortress was entirely impenetrable. Julian had brought a plastic butter knife to a heavily armed gunfight. But the betrayal still stung deeply. It wasn't just about the money or the house anymore. It was the sheer, unadulterated joy they took in my perceived failure. Julian was practically throwing a parade in the group chat because he genuinely thought I was bankrupt. I decided to do a little digital digging of my own while the bank and the police set their trap. I logged into my desktop computer and ran a background check on Sarah's old accounts. I still had some of her old passwords saved in my browser history, a security flaw I hadn't bothered to fix. I know I probably shouldn't have snooped, but I was looking for a smoking gun, and I was entirely out of patience for playing by the rules of etiquette. I accessed an old shared cloud drive we used when planning our canceled wedding, a drive she apparently forgot to wipe. There it was, buried 3 folders deep, a hidden folder titled simply, Contingency. I clicked it open, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside were high-resolution, perfectly lit scans of my mortgage statements, my property tax records, my bank routing numbers, and the deed to the beach house. The creation date on the files was from exactly 7 months ago, exactly 1 week before she sat on my couch and broke off the engagement. She had systematically, ruthlessly copied my entire financial life before walking out the door. And right next to those image files was a downloaded PDF document, a non-disclosure agreement draft, an NDA between Sarah and Julian. She literally tried to legally bind him to give her a 20% cut of the beach house sale in exchange for the stolen documents. I sat back in my heavy leather chair and laughed out loud. It was a dark, humorless laugh that echoed sharply in the empty room. They were so incredibly stupid. They left a digital paper trail a mile wide, glowing neon red for the police to find. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't the group chat. It was a direct, incoming call from my cousin Chloe. Chloe was the only person in the extended family who ever treated me like a normal human being. She was young, still in college, entirely dependent on her parents' college fund, and mostly stayed out of the toxic family drama. I answered immediately. "Hey, Chloe." "Marcus?" she whispered, her voice shaking violently, clearly terrified. "Marcus, what is happening? The family chat is going absolutely crazy. Julian is saying he's buying your house today. Are you okay? Do you need a place to stay? You can crash on my dorm couch." The pure, unselfish concern in her voice almost broke my resolve. "I'm fine, Chloe. I'm not losing the house. I promise. But Julian is committing a massive state-level felony right now." I told her bluntly, deciding not to sugarcoat it. "The house is paid off. I own it outright. Julian forged legal documents to try and steal it." Chloe gasped loudly into the receiver. "Oh my God. I knew it. I knew something was horribly wrong." She paused, and I heard her take a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady herself. "Marcus, I have to tell you something, and it makes me physically sick to say it." "What is it?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "Last Sunday, I went over to Aunt Eleanor and Uncle Arthur's house, your parents' house, for dinner. Julian was there. I walked into the dining room a few minutes early and they had papers spread out all over the mahogany table. Julian was showing your mom a fake bank letter. I stood in the hallway. I heard him. My blood stopped moving in my veins. My mother. Yes, Chloe sobbed quietly. Julian told her he had a guy who could make the county stamps look totally real. He was nervous. And Aunt Eleanor, Marcus, your mom looked right at him, patted his hand and said, "Just do it. It's about time we teach Marcus a permanent lesson about his arrogance. He thinks he's so much better than us with his ocean rocks and his little boats." She knew Marcus. She knew the papers were fake, and she gave him her explicit blessing to ruin your life. I closed my eyes. The ghost ledger wasn't long enough to contain this level of betrayal. My own mother, the woman who gave birth to me, who raised me, had sat at her dining room table and actively sanctioned my financial execution just to soothe her own bitter, twisted ego. "Thank you, Chloe," I said, my voice completely devoid of any recognizable emotion. "Stay completely out of the group chat. Do not warn them. Do not say a word. Just sit back and watch the fireworks." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice tiny. "I'm going to let them drown," I replied, and hung up the phone. The storm was gathering violently directly over the county courthouse, and I was sitting completely, eerily peacefully in the eye of it. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I walked quietly into my modern kitchen, made myself a turkey sandwich with exact precision, and waited for the heavy, unforgiving institutional machinery of the banking system and local law enforcement to do their jobs. Detective Elena Rostova had promised me a swift and brutal resolution, and I believed her. I kept my phone propped up against my coffee mug on the counter, watching the family group chat scroll past. It was a fascinating, horrifying psychological study in real time. Julian was getting incredibly impatient at the courthouse. "Clerk says there's a security hold on the system," Julian typed, adding an annoyed face emoji. "Probably just a computer glitch. The floor manager is coming out from the back office to speak with me right now. God, government employees are so slow." Mom replied immediately, her text dripping with false maternal warmth. "Stay confident, sweetie. Don't let them intimidate you. You are doing the absolute right thing for this family's financial future." I took a slow bite of my sandwich. The sheer, unadulterated delusion was almost impressive. They had completely, thoroughly justified this monumental theft in their own minds. They had convinced themselves that by stealing a $2.8 million property from their own flesh and blood, they were somehow the righteous heroes of the story, securing the family's legacy. My phone rang loudly, breaking the silence of the kitchen. It was Richard Sterling from Coastal Federal Bank. "Marcus?" Richard said, and I could hear the grim, professional satisfaction vibrating in his voice. "The trap is set. The courthouse security has completely locked down the front exits. Detective Rostova has 2 plainclothes officers moving into the lobby to flank him as we speak. I am about to call the clerk's desk directly and ask them to hand the phone to Julian." "Put me on the line," I demanded, my voice cold and hard. "Mute my microphone so he can't hear me breathing. I just want to listen to his world end." "Done," Richard said. A sharp click, a brief ring, and then the ambient sound of the busy courthouse lobby filtered through my speaker. I heard the clerk's voice, slightly nervous but maintaining protocol. "Mr. Vance? Sir? I have the senior vice president of the lien holding bank on the phone. He needs to speak with you directly to clear this hold on your check." I heard the loud rustle of the phone changing hands. Julian's voice came through, dripping with his usual unwarranted arrogance and impatience. "This is Julian Vance. Look, I don't know what the massive delay is about, but I have a certified cashier's check right here. Just process the damn deed transfer so I can get out of here." "Mr. Julian Vance." Richard Sterling's voice boomed through the line, authoritative, heavy, and completely devoid of warmth. "This is Richard Sterling from Coastal Federal Bank. I am calling regarding the property located at 847 Ocean Vista Drive." "Yeah, the foreclosure property," Julian said, snapping his fingers impatiently. "Let's wrap this up. I have a tea time at the country club at 2 o'clock. "There is no foreclosure, Mr. Vance," Richard stated clearly, enunciating every single syllable. "The property at 847 Ocean Vista Drive is owned completely outright by Mr. Marcus Vance. The mortgage was paid in full 3 weeks ago, a $1.2 million early settlement." Silence. Pure, absolute, magnificent silence from Julian's end of the phone. I could practically hear the gears in his brain grinding to a violent, catastrophic halt. "What?" Julian finally stammered. His arrogant tone completely vanished, instantly replaced by a high-pitched squeak of genuine panic. No, that's impossible. He's broke. He's a failure. I saw the default notice. I have the papers right here." "You did not see a default notice," Richard countered smoothly, tightening the noose. "Because the document you are holding in your hand right now is a confirmed, fabricated forgery. Your explicit attempt to purchase this property using falsified county documents constitutes attempted real estate fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. Listen here." Julian started to raise his voice, the sheer panic turning into wild, defensive anger. "You don't know what the hell you're talking about. The listing was online. I saw it." "There is no listing," Richard replied effortlessly, dismantling Julian's lies with corporate precision. "And because of this blatant fraud attempt, we have permanently frozen your $400,000 cashier's check pending a massive criminal investigation. That freeze specifically includes the $200,000 wire transfer from your father, Arthur Vance. You will not be getting that money back today, or likely ever." "You can't freeze my money," Julian shouted, completely losing his composure, his voice echoing loudly in the courthouse lobby. "That's my dad's retirement fund. You can't do this. I want to speak to my lawyer right now." "That would be highly advisable, sir," Richard said, his tone turning to pure, absolute ice. "Because if you turn around right now, you will see Detective Rostova from the Financial Crimes Unit standing directly behind you." Through the phone speaker, I heard a sharp, terrified gasp from Julian. Then, a new voice entered the audio feed, Detective Elena Rostova. "Julian Vance." Elena's voice was sharp, commanding, and left zero room for negotiation. "Turn around slowly and place your hands flat on the counter. Do not attempt to run. Do not resist." Wait, Julian shrieked, his voice cracking like a child's. "This is a massive misunderstanding. I was just trying to help my brother. It's a private family matter." I reached over and unmuted my microphone. I leaned close to the phone, making sure my voice would carry clearly through the receiver into his ear. "It stopped being a family matter," I said softly, making sure my voice cut cleanly through the chaos of the lobby. "The exact second you tried to steal my home, Julian." Julian froze completely. "Marcus? Are you on this call?" "I am," I said. "And Julian? Good luck making that tea time." I muted myself again. I heard the heavy, metallic clink of steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists. The sound of Julian's frantic, pathetic sobbing, begging the officers to let him go, echoed through the line as they pulled his arms forcefully behind his back. Richard Sterling thanked the clerk professionally and ended the call. I set my phone down on the desk. The silence in my office returned, but it felt entirely different now. It didn't feel lonely anymore. Felt incredibly clean. But the explosion was just beginning. The courthouse was handled, but the real war was about to detonate inside the family group chat. They were about to realize that the son they treated like absolute garbage had just triggered the total collapse of their entire world. And I was ready for every single second of it. The second the call with the bank ended, I leaned back in my heavy leather office chair and just watched the screen of my smartphone. I did not have to wait long. It took exactly 30 seconds for the absolute nuclear meltdown to begin. The family group chat, which had been a non-stop parade of gloating, celebration, and self-congratulations all morning, suddenly shifted tone so violently it gave me whiplash. It started with a frantic, heavily misspelled text from Julian. He wrote, "Dad, what the hell is happening?" The clerk called the police. "They froze the check. They froze your $200,000 wire transfer. Call the bank right now." Before Dad could even respond, another text from Julian came through, this one clearly typed by someone with shaking hands and a racing heart. "Marcus, did you tell the bank I am trying to steal your house? Tell them it is a mistake. Call them right now and fix this. They are putting me in handcuffs." Then, there was absolute radio silence from Julian. Because, as I well knew, Detective Elena Rostova had just confiscated his phone as prime evidence in a massive felony investigation. Then Dad entered the chat, his texts radiating the entitled authority he always wielded like a club. "Marcus, what the hell is going on? Julian is saying he is being arrested. Why did the bank freeze my $200,000? That is my money. I pulled that from my retirement and the equity on our house. Fix this right now." Mom chimed in immediately after him, her text practically radiating her usual toxic entitlement and complete lack of empathy. "Marcus, stop throwing a tantrum over a piece of real estate you do not even use properly. Call Julian right now and clear up this misunderstanding. You are embarrassing this family in public." A misunderstanding. That was the word she actively chose to use. Forging legal county documents, attempting to steal a $2.8 million beachfront property, and conspiring to leave me completely bankrupt was just a little family misunderstanding in her eyes. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the entire chat log, making absolutely sure the timestamps were perfectly visible, and saved it to a secure encrypted folder labeled Evidence. I typed exactly one response. It was the last message I would ever send to that toxic group. "I live here. This is my primary residence and my home office. I paid off the $1.2 million mortgage 3 weeks ago. The house is mine, free and clear. Julian attempted to fraudulently purchase my property using forged government documents. The bank and the police are currently investigating him for multiple felonies. I did not authorize any of this, and I will not be dropping the charges." I hit send. Then, with a profound, overwhelming sense of peace washing over me, I permanently left the group chat. I deleted the conversation thread entirely. My phone immediately started ringing. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then Mom. I let it ring. 6 calls in a row back to back. They were panicking. For the first time in my entire life, they were no longer in control of the family narrative, and the loss of power was driving them absolutely insane. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the rolling waves, fully expecting them to show up at my front door. And I was right. Less than an hour later, I heard the aggressive, loud crunch of gravel in my long driveway. I looked at my security camera feed on my tablet. Dad's massive luxury SUV had basically skidded to a halt, parking diagonally across my pristine driveway, crushing some of the landscaping. Both of my parents leaped out of the car. They did not look like loving parents concerned for their sons. They looked like furious corporate managers coming to aggressively scold a disobedient, entry-level employee. I did not let them pound on the door. I opened the heavy oak front door and stood firmly in the doorway, my arms crossed, physically blocking their entrance. "Marcus!" Mom shrieked, her face flushed red with anger, her designer handbag swinging wildly. "What is wrong with you? Julian is at the police precinct. His lawyer just called us. They are treating him like a common criminal." "He is a criminal, Mom," I said smoothly, not raising my voice even a fraction of an inch. "He committed grand larceny and wire fraud." Dad pushed his way to the front of the porch, his face a mask of absolute, unyielding fury. "You listen to me right now. I do not care what little feud you have going on with your brother. You are going to pick up your phone, call that bank vice president, and tell him this was a massive familial misunderstanding. You are going to tell them Julian had your explicit permission to handle your real estate affairs." I actually laughed. Couldn't help it. The sheer, unadulterated delusion was breathtaking. "You want me to lie to a federal bank investigator and a county detective? You want me to commit perjury to save the golden son who just tried to leave me homeless? You are not homeless," Mom yelled, throwing her hands up in the air in pure exasperation. "You could have just moved back into your old room at our house. Julian needs this win, Marcus. He has been stressed. His salary at the firm has not been enough to cover his lifestyle. He is up for a massive promotion, and a criminal record will ruin his entire career." "His career is already over," I stated flatly, stripping away all of her illusions. "You do not get to work in finance when you have a felony record for financial fraud. And frankly, Mom, neither of you are walking away from this clean." Dad stepped closer, puffing out his chest, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. A bullying tactic that might have worked when I was a terrified teenager, but was completely pathetic and ineffective now. "My $200,000 is tied up in that frozen cashier's check, Marcus. Do you have any idea what you have done? I took a massive tax penalty withdrawing that money. I leveraged our house. If I do not get that money back by the end of the month, your mother and I are going to miss our mortgage payment. We could lose our home. You are putting our inheritance at risk." I looked my father dead in the eye. I searched myself for a shred of sympathy, a single drop of familial obligation. I felt absolutely nothing. The ghost ledger had completely drained my emotional reserves for these people over the last decade. "You wired him that money in 90 seconds, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register that finally made him stop in his tracks. 90 seconds, Dad. You did not call me. You did not ask if I was okay. You did not care if I was losing everything I had ever worked for. You saw a prime opportunity to profit off my supposed downfall, and you took it without a second thought. You treated my total financial ruin like it was your own personal lottery payout. So no, Dad, I am not making a phone call. I am going to sit back and let the police trace every single dollar." Mom burst into dramatic, theatrical tears, the exact kind of fake wailing she usually reserved for a funeral or when she desperately wanted to manipulate a social situation. "How can you be so vindictive? We are family. Family protects each other. A family does not file a lawsuit against its own blood. Family does not forge county documents to steal a $2.8 million house," I replied coldly, completely immune to her performance. "You sat at your dining room table last Sunday, Mom. You looked directly at those fake papers, and you explicitly told Julian to do it just to teach me a lesson." Her tears stopped instantly. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking pale, hollow, and absolutely terrified. "How do you know about that?" "I know everything," I said. stepping forward, forcing them to take a step back down the porch stairs. I know about the fake stamp. I know about the template. I know Sarah stole my documents and tried to extort him for 20%. The police have the entire digital footprint. They have her cloud drive. They have Julian's internet search history. It is entirely over. The trap did not just snap shut on Julian. It snapped shut on all of you. Dad looked utterly bewildered. The absolute certainty in my voice was finally piercing his thick skull. Marcus, you have to stop this. Please, let's just sit down with Julian's lawyer and figure this out quietly. We can settle this out of court. Do not press charges. I do not have a choice anymore. I lied effortlessly. I fully intended to press every single charge available to me, but I wanted them to feel the crushing, unstoppable weight of the justice system. It is a state case now. The district attorney is pursuing it aggressively. I am just the victim on paper. Now, if you will excuse me, I have to go down to the police precinct to give my official sworn statement. You should probably head down there too. I am sure Julian is going to need someone to pay his bail. I shut the heavy oak door directly in their faces. I locked the deadbolt. I listened to them argue loudly and viciously on my porch for another 5 minutes before they finally got back into their luxury SUV and sped away. They still thought I was just throwing a childish tantrum. They still firmly believed they could manipulate the legal system the exact same way they manipulated our family dynamic for 30 years. They were walking straight into the ultimate trap of their own making. And the best part? The biggest twist of the entire decade had not even dropped yet. I grabbed my car keys, got into my truck, and started the long drive to the downtown police precinct. It was finally time to pull the curtain back on the pathetic, struggling life they thought I lived, and show them the absolute, unvarnished reality of who I actually was. Walking into the downtown police precinct, the air felt thick and heavy, smelling faintly of stale coffee, industrial floor cleaner, and pure human desperation. I was immediately recognized at the front desk, escorted past the bustling bullpen by a uniformed officer, and led directly to Detective Elena Rostova's private office. She was waiting for me, thick manila files already spread out meticulously across her metal desk. "Mr. Vance," Elena said, standing up to shake my hand. Her grip was firm, her eyes sharp and deeply analytical. "Thank you for coming down so quickly. Your brother is currently sitting in holding room B. His attorney, a man named Victor Rossi, just arrived about 20 minutes ago. Your parents are also waiting out in the main lobby, making quite a loud scene, aggressively demanding to speak to the chief of police." "Let them make a scene," I said, taking a seat opposite her desk, crossing my ankle over my knee. It will only make the prosecutor's job infinitely easier when they review the psychological character profiles of everyone involved. Where exactly do we stand on the physical evidence? Elena tapped a remarkably thick file folder. It is a total, undeniable slam dunk. We executed a rapid search warrant on Julian's smartphone and digital devices. We found the exact website where he purchased the foreclosure document template. We found his long chain of emails with your ex-fiancée, Sarah, actively negotiating the transfer of your highly sensitive financial documents. We even found a draft of a non-disclosure agreement she tried to make him sign to protect her payout. It is incredibly damning. I nodded, feeling a cold, clinical wave of satisfaction wash over me. And the funds. The $400,000 cashier's check is locked securely in our evidence vault. Your father's $200,000 wire transfer is frozen indefinitely. Because he provided material support to a fraudulent transaction, his assets are currently under severe review by the Financial Crimes Division. He will be incredibly lucky if he does not face criminal accessory charges by the end of the week. Just then, there was a sharp, arrogant knock on the frosted glass door of the office. Before Elena could even grant permission to enter, the door swung open. It was Victor Rossi, Julian's high-priced defense lawyer. He was a slick-looking guy wearing an expensive, tailored Italian suit, sporting a patronizing smile that immediately rubbed me the wrong way. Right behind him, looking absolutely furious but slightly intimidated by the heavy police presence, were my parents. Detective Rostova, Victor said smoothly, entirely ignoring my presence in the room. I represent Julian Vance. I believe there has been a massive, unfortunate overreaction here today. My client was operating under the genuine, albeit mistaken, belief that his brother's property was in severe financial distress. He was attempting a family bailout, an act of sheer generosity, not fraud. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that cut through the tension in the room. Generosity? He forged a county seal, Victor. Victor finally looked at me, his eyes narrowing as he sized me up, clearly unimpressed by my casual clothes. You must be Marcus. Look, Marcus, family disputes get heated. But trying to ruin your older brother's life over a simple miscommunication is extreme. Julian is a highly respected financial advisor. He has a pristine record. If you push this to a criminal trial, we will immediately file a civil lawsuit for defamation, loss of income, and emotional distress. You do not have the legal or financial resources to fight a protracted court battle against a man with Julian's corporate backing. My parents nodded vigorously in agreement behind him. Dad puffed out his chest, stepping forward. Listen to the lawyer, Marcus. Julian is on the absolute fast track to success. He is currently interviewing for a massive, senior executive promotion at one of the biggest marine technology companies in the state. If you ruin this opportunity for him, I will personally make sure you never see a single dime of inheritance. You will be cut out of the will entirely. I slowly stood up from my chair. I looked at Victor, then at my father, and finally at my mother. The sheer arrogance in the room was suffocating, but it was built on a foundation of absolute, crumbling sand. A senior executive promotion? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet, savoring the moment. At a marine tech company? Let me guess. Is the company called Oceanic Tech Solutions? Dad looked slightly taken aback that I actually knew the name, but he quickly recovered his smug, superior expression. Yes, actually. It is. It is an incredibly prestigious firm. They handle multi-million-dollar government contracts. They are going to pay Julian an astronomical salary. Something you would not possibly understand with your little beach hobbies. He has been interviewing directly with their board of directors for 3 months. I turned to Detective Rostova. Elena, is Julian in the holding room right now? Can he hear us? He is in the interview room right next door, Elena said, pointing to the large two-way mirror on the adjoining wall. The audio feed is turned on. We were just about to go in for formal questioning. Good, I said. I walked right up to the two-way mirror, knowing Julian was sitting on the other side, probably sweating through his cheap tailored suit. I looked back at Victor Rossi, who was starting to lose his smug smile, clearly sensing that something was horribly, irreversibly wrong. Victor, I said clearly, my voice ringing out in the small office, directed at both the lawyer and the mirror. You should probably advise your client to stop lying on his resume. And Dad, you should probably do a basic Google search before you brag about your golden child's career prospects. What are you talking about? Mom snapped, crossing her arms defensively, her voice trembling slightly. Oceanic Tech Solutions, I said, articulating every single syllable with lethal precision, is my company. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and utterly profound. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Excuse me, Victor Rossi stammered, his professional, slick facade completely cracking, his eyes darting between me and the file on the desk. I am the sole founder, the primary shareholder, and the chief executive officer of Oceanic Tech Solutions, I stated, my voice echoing with unshakable authority. I started the firm 7 years ago in my living room. We secure massive environmental contracts for the federal government. My actual annual salary, Dad, dwarfs yours and Julian's combined. The exact reason Julian has been interviewing for 3 months is because my HR department flagged his application as grossly underqualified on day 1. But I personally told them to keep stringing him along, scheduling useless interviews, just to see how desperate he was getting. Dad's jaw physically dropped. His face turned a sickly, pale shade of gray. That is impossible. You play with rocks and boats. You do not run a corporation. The $85,000 research boat I bought? I continued, stepping much closer to my father, refusing to let him look away. That was a business expense. I wrote it off on my taxes. The $1.2 million early mortgage payoff? That was my year-end executive bonus. While you were praising Julian for buying a Porsche on a predatory 84-month loan, I was securing a $70 million coastal restoration contract with the state of California. I looked back at the two-way mirror. Did you hear that, Julian? The tech billionaire you have been practically begging for a job is the exact same brother whose house you just tried to steal. From the other side of the glass, I heard a muffled, agonizing, gut-wrenching sound. It sounded like a man having a complete, catastrophic psychological breakdown. Julian had finally realized the absolute magnitude of his mistake. He had not just tried to scam his poor, struggling brother. He had tried to scam the powerful CEO of the company he was desperately trying to work for. He had destroyed his entire career, his freedom, and his reputation in one single, incredibly stupid move. Victor Rossi rapidly packed his fine leather briefcase, his hands visibly shaking. He looked at my parents with pure, unadulterated disgust. You told me he was a broke, disgruntled sibling trying to extort you for cash. You completely lied to me. I am not representing a client who commits felony fraud against a corporate CEO with unlimited legal resources. Find another lawyer. I am out. Victor stormed out of the office, slamming the frosted glass door aggressively behind him. My parents stood there, completely paralyzed, staring at me as if I was a terrifying stranger they had never met. The narrative they had carefully constructed for a decade, the narrative where they were the successful ones and I was the tragic failure, had just been obliterated into a million unrecoverable pieces. The immediate fallout was swifter, more comprehensive, and far more brutal than I could have ever anticipated. Once the fragile illusion of my failure was completely shattered, the harsh reality of their own toxic actions crashed down on them with the unstoppable weight of a collapsing skyscraper. Julian was formally charged with attempted real estate fraud, forgery of official government documents, and grand larceny. Because the appraised value of the property he tried to steal was a staggering $2.8 million. The district attorney happily elevated the charges to the highest possible felony tier in the state. He was not granted bail immediately because the judge deemed him a massive flight risk, given his mounting, desperate debts and lack of employment. He spent the entire agonizing weekend sitting in a cold, concrete county jail cell, wearing an incredibly unflattering orange jumpsuit. It was a far cry from the tailored, expensive suits he loved to parade around in at our Thanksgiving dinners. But Julian was not the only one whose life completely and utterly imploded. Sarah, my treacherous, gold-digging ex-fiancée, honestly thought she had executed the perfect white-collar crime. She was walking around her office acting like she had won a massive divorce settlement without ever having to actually walk down the aisle. But the digital footprint she carelessly left behind was undeniable and ironclad. Detective Rostova did not just arrest her quietly. She made it a highly public, humiliating spectacle. The police executed a search warrant at Sarah's upscale corporate marketing firm right in the middle of a busy Tuesday afternoon. They escorted her out of the glass building in heavy steel handcuffs in front of her boss and all of her gossiping colleagues. She was formally charged with corporate espionage, theft of highly confidential financial documents, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. Her employer fired her immediately, stripping her of her massive salary before she even reached the police station for booking. When she called me from the precinct, sobbing hysterically into the receiver and begging me to drop the lawsuit against her because we used to love each other so much, I simply hung up the phone and blocked her number. You do not get to weaponize past love to escape the devastating consequences of present betrayal. And then, there were my parents, the architects of this entire toxic dynamic. The $200,000 my father hastily wired to Julian remained locked in a frozen escrow account under strict federal review. Because that massive sum of money was intended to facilitate a felony fraud, the state treated it as direct evidence of a crime. It took months of exhausting legal battles, expensive retainer fees, and humiliating depositions for Dad to even prove he wasn't a criminal mastermind, but rather just a foolish, incredibly biased enabler. The financial strain completely broke them. Dad had drained their liquid savings accounts and pulled massive equity from their family house to fund Julian's scam. Without that money, they simply could not maintain their lavish lifestyle. They missed 2 consecutive mortgage payments. They had to drain a college fund they had set up for my cousin Chloe just to keep the lights on. The irony was incredibly thick. The parents who endlessly mocked me for supposedly facing foreclosure were now facing actual, terrifying foreclosure themselves. But the financial ruin was nothing compared to the social fallout. That was what truly destroyed my father's spirit. Dad's entire identity, his whole sense of self-worth, was wrapped up in his polished image at the local country club. He had spent the previous week aggressively bragging to his golf buddies, especially a loudmouth named Greg, about how his genius son Julian was buying a distressed property for pennies on the dollar, an amazing real estate flip that would make them millions. Well, it turned out that Greg's daughter worked as a paralegal at the county courthouse. She personally saw Julian get arrested in the lobby. She saw the forged documents, and she went home and told her father absolutely everything. Within 48 hours, the entire country club knew that Arthur Vance's golden boy was a desperate, broke felon who tried to steal a house from his own highly successful brother. Dad walked into the plush clubhouse that weekend, expecting his usual warm reception, and was met with absolute, freezing silence. The men he used to drink expensive scotch with physically turned their backs on him. The golf partners suddenly found other foursomes. He was completely ostracized, treated like a contagious disease, a social pariah in the absolute only community he actually cared about. Mom tried desperately to maintain appearances, but the stress of the impending lawsuit and the social exile was destroying her. She called me constantly from different blocked numbers, leaving long, rambling, emotionally unhinged voicemails. She alternated wildly between begging for financial help and screaming that I had maliciously destroyed the family. "Marcus, please," she cried in one particularly pathetic, weeping voicemail. "We need $50,000 right now just to cover the lawyer's retainer to get Julian a plea deal. He is terrified. The atmosphere in this house is colder than a funeral parlor. You have millions. You are a CEO. Why are you punishing us like this? You are supposed to take care of us." I listened to the voicemail while sitting on the expansive wooden deck of my beautiful beach house, sipping a perfectly brewed coffee, watching the sun set over the vast Pacific Ocean. I searched my heart, and I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. They did not drain Chloe's college fund because of me. They drained it because they bet absolutely everything on a criminal, and the house always wins. They were experiencing the exact anxiety, fear, and financial terror they had gleefully hoped I would experience. Karma wasn't just knocking on their door. It had kicked the door completely off its hinges and moved permanently into their living room. I forwarded the voicemail directly to my corporate lawyer with strict instructions to draft a formal cease and desist letter against my own parents. The era of the Vance family treating me like collateral damage, a punching bag for their own insecurities, was officially permanently over. The complex legal proceedings dragged on for nearly 8 exhausting months. A slow, agonizing bureaucratic grind that completely drained what little was left of Julian's arrogant spirit and my parents' rapidly dwindling bank accounts. I did not attend any of the minor preliminary hearings. I let my team of ruthless corporate lawyers handle all the mundane paperwork. I only showed up in person for the final sentencing. The courtroom was vast, lined with dark wood paneling, and incredibly intimidating. Julian stood before the judge, looking easily 10 years older than his actual age. He had lost a significant amount of weight. His posture was permanently slumped, and the arrogant sneer he used to wear like a badge of honor was completely, utterly gone. His overworked, court-appointed public defender, because he could no longer afford private counsel, managed to negotiate a plea deal to avoid hard state prison time, mostly because it was his first documented criminal offense. Judge Harrison looked down from the high bench, his expression entirely devoid of sympathy, adjusting his reading glasses. Julian Vance, you have formally pleaded guilty to attempted real estate fraud and forgery. Your actions were highly premeditated, malicious, and targeted a vulnerable member of your own family. You are hereby sentenced to 5 years of strict, supervised probation, 500 hours of mandatory community service, and a $50,000 restitution fine to cover the victim's legal fees. Furthermore, due to the nature of your crimes, you are permanently barred from holding any fiduciary licenses or working in the financial sector in the state of California. I watched Julian's shoulders heave as he quietly, brokenly sobbed. He had lost his lucrative career, his pristine reputation, and his entire future, all because he simply could not stand the idea of me having something nice. He wanted to destroy me, and instead, he completely destroyed himself. Dad sat in the very back row of the public gallery, looking like a shattered, broken man. He had managed to avoid criminal accessory charges by fully cooperating with the police investigation and admitting his sheer, breathtaking negligence on public record. But he lost nearly $60,000 in legal fees just to clear his name, and his precious social reputation was in absolute tatters. As I walked out of the heavy courtroom doors, my cousin Chloe caught up to me in the brightly lit hallway. She looked exhausted but profoundly relieved. She had recently secured full custody of her own life, moving far away from the toxic orbit of my parents. "Marcus," she said softly, hugging her arms tightly across her chest. "I just wanted to say, I am so incredibly sorry for everything they did to you over the years. For the years I just sat there at Thanksgiving dinners and did not defend you when they made those cruel jokes. I see it now. I see how incredibly toxic this family really is. You do not have to apologize to me, Chloe," I told her honestly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You were just a kid trying to survive in a dysfunctional system. But you are an adult now. You get to choose who you surround yourself with. Do not let their bitterness and greed infect your life. Break the cycle." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Are you ever going to speak to them again?" "No," I said, a profound, unshakable sense of finality settling deeply in my chest. Some bridges should not just be burned. The ashes should be scattered into the ocean so they can never, ever be rebuilt. That night, I drove back to the beach house. The house they tried so desperately to steal. The house that was completely, legally, and spiritually mine. I walked into my home office, powered up my laptop, and opened the highly encrypted folder on my desktop. I clicked on the ghost ledger. I scrolled slowly through the 52 detailed entries of disrespect, the casual dismissals, the cruel insults, the stolen joy. I read through every single line item one last time. For years, this simple spreadsheet had been my armor, my psychological way of tracking the emotional debts they owed me. But as I looked at it now, sitting in the quiet, peaceful solitude of my beautiful home, knowing my company was thriving, knowing my future was entirely secure, I realized something incredibly liberating. The emotional account was finally closed. The balance was zero. I did not need to keep counting what was taken from me, because I was entirely too busy documenting what I was building. I highlighted all 52 rows, hit the delete key, and emptied the digital trash bin. The ghost ledger was gone forever. It had served its purpose, and I no longer needed to carry that heavy burden. A few weeks later, my company, Oceanic Tech Solutions, was featured prominently on the cover of a major national business magazine. The multi-page article highlighted our groundbreaking work in restoring damaged coral reefs and mentioned a new, massive fellowship program I had just fully funded for emerging marine biologists. I did not mail a copy of the magazine to my parents. I did not send them a digital link to rub my success in their faces. I simply let it exist in the world, knowing that my success was mine alone, and their permanent absence was the greatest gift they ever inadvertently gave me. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is not a screaming match in a driveway or a dramatic confrontation in a courtroom. It is simply walking away, building an incredible, impenetrable life, and letting the people who drastically underestimated you watch from the outside as you soar higher than they could ever possibly comprehend. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If there is one massive thing I have learned from this entire nightmare, it is this: your value is not determined by the people who refuse to see it. Family is supposed to be a solid foundation, not a heavy anchor trying to drag you underwater. You have the absolute right to set unbreakable boundaries, to protect your peace, and to walk away from anyone, even blood relatives, who treats your success like an insult to their existence. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to completely cut ties to save yourself? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.